911, what's the location of the emergency?
My daughter is missing.
What's your address, ma'am?
She's gone. We can't find her anywhere. I've called all her friends.
How old is she?
11.
Okay, what's her name, ma'am?
Carlie, C-A-R-L-I-E.
And last name?
Brucia, B-R-U-C-I-A.
This is the story of 11-year-old Carlie Brucia, whose final moments were captured on camera in the footage you just saw, as a violent predator snatched her in broad daylight. Her disappearance was reported within minutes, but it was too late. Carlie's case would go down in history as one of the most harrowing crimes against a child. As we dive into this mystery, our thoughts are with Carlie Brucia's loved ones, whose lives were forever altered by her tragic and untimely demise. It all started on a seemingly ordinary day, January 31st, 2004. Carlie had spent the night at a friend's house, but her eagerness to catch the Super Bowl meant she had to make the short walk home alone. When her friend's mother expressed concern and alerted Carlie's mother, Susan, the family sprang into action. Susan quickly dispatched her husband and Carlie's stepfather, Steve Kanzler, to find their daughter. As Steve searched the route that Carlie would have taken, he found no trace of her, and the terrifying reality of the situation began to set in. As Steve drove around for over an hour, his mind raced with endless possibilities of where Carlie could be. The pit in his stomach grew with each passing moment, until finally he returned home hoping for a miracle. But as the minutes turned into hours, and Carlie still hadn't returned, Steve knew that his worst fears were becoming a reality. Susan's intuition was already telling her that something terrible had happened to their daughter, and her gut feeling was soon to be confirmed. Together, they embarked on a frantic search for Carlie, screaming her name out of the car window as they scoured the town. In their pursuit, they stumbled upon a peculiar red truck driving slowly by them, and their hearts sank at the realization. Later, they found themselves outside Carlie's friend's house, only to be greeted by the same red truck parked out front. The situation was growing more suspicious by the minute, and it was clear that they needed help. Susan's voice trembled with fear as she dialed 911, begging for someone to help find her daughter. As soon as the call came in, the police sprang into action, issuing an alert for Carlie and scouring the area for any sign of her. But despite their tireless efforts, the search yielded no results. Determined not to give up, Carlie's loved ones took matters into their own hands and began distributing missing persons flyers with her photo on them. However, during this time, a disturbing incident occurred that raised a few eyebrows. Allegedly, Carlie's stepfather, Steve, visited a local equipment rental business to hand out flyers, but made an odd request of one of the employees, asking if he could purchase drugs in a couple of days after this whole thing blew over. The employee was taken aback by the remark, given that Carlie was still missing, and alerted the authorities. Detectives also noticed something amiss with Steve's behavior, leading them to bring him in for questioning. Though he maintained that he had been at home with Susan the entire time, investigators weren't entirely convinced. After a thorough investigation, Steve was eventually cleared as a suspect, but he did provide another name, Ron Choquette. Ron was the owner of the red tow truck that had been spotted earlier, and it turned out he had been dating the mother of Carlie's friend for the past 2 months. As the investigation into Carlie's disappearance continued, a new info emerged. Ron was the only adult present the night Carlie slept over at some point. Steve informed noticing Ron's red truck driving suspiciously around the area they were searching. Detectives followed up on this information and spoke with Ron, but he claimed to have left for work before Carlie departed and had seen nothing unusual. His alibi checked out, and police ruled him out as a suspect. The following day, officers returned to Carlie's home and spoke with Susan once more. She reiterated that her daughter had never run away before, and that this was completely out of character for her. However, Carlie's friend's statements painted a different picture. According to her, Carlie had expressed negative feelings about her family the night before and had even said she didn't want to go home because of her responsibilities. These revelations made investigators second-guess whether Carlie might have run away of her own volition, despite her mother's insistence that this was not in her character. Despite their best efforts, investigators couldn't eliminate the possibility that Carlie had met with a gruesome fate. Before leaving the residence, they gave her mother chilling instructions to obtain her daughter's dental records from her dentist, just in case they were needed to identify her remains. Meanwhile, Carlie's classmates arrived at school the next day to find her seat empty. Authorities brought in tracking dogs to aid in their search, and the dogs eventually led them to the parking lot of Evie's car wash, an unexpected location not on Carlie's route home, but a known shortcut. Though the dogs lost her scent, the car wash's numerous surveillance cameras revealed what appeared to be a young girl's abduction at around 6:30 p.m. The unknown man initially appeared nonchalant, as if he was going to pass by, but suddenly lunged forward and grabbed her arm. He must have been incredibly menacing, standing directly in front of her and blocking her escape. The fear and panic that Carlie must have felt when she was abducted are unimaginable. It's possible that her captor promised her that everything would be okay if she followed his instructions. However, in abduction situations, it's best to resist right from the start. Abductors typically look for easy targets, and if their victim fights back and makes a scene, the abductor may back off to avoid attracting attention. It's crucial to teach your children to be loud and assertive if they're ever approached by a stranger trying to lure them away. They should never get into a vehicle with someone they don't know. Once they're in the abductor's car, they're completely vulnerable and have little hope of escape. The abductor may try to manipulate the child by making false promises or claiming to be picking them up on a parent's behalf. It's wise to establish a safe word with your child to signal that they need help without alerting the abductor. Empower your children with the knowledge that a safe word can be their lifeline. Reinforce the importance of never getting into a car with a stranger unless they use that safe word, no matter how convincing the stranger may sound. Practice the safe word often with your child to help them remember it in a time of crisis. Carlie's parents were devastated when they recognized their daughter in the disturbing footage. The man who abducted her was a complete stranger, but the video offered some clues about his identity. He was a white male of average height with tattoos on his forearms, and he wore a jumpsuit with a name tag that was too blurry to read. Carlie appeared to be caught off guard by the man's sudden approach and was forcibly led out of view. The video was played repeatedly on local news, generating a deluge of tips, but most proved fruitless. As the hours passed, investigators grew increasingly concerned. However, they received a promising lead later that day when several callers identified the suspect as Joseph Smith, a 37-year-old auto mechanic with a long criminal record dating back to 1993. As investigators dug deeper into Joseph Smith's criminal record, they discovered a troubling pattern of violent offenses against women, including kidnapping, aggravated battery, and false imprisonment. Shockingly, Joseph was actually out on parole for a drug bust at the time of Carlie's disappearance. 2 days after Carlie vanished, one of Joseph's coworkers tipped off the police, claiming that the man in the surveillance footage strongly resembled Joseph based on his mannerisms and clothing. Another employee also reported that Joseph had been acting nervous and appeared to be under the influence of narcotics at work the day after Carlie went missing. As authorities delved further into the case, they began to piece together Joseph's movements in the days leading up to Carlie's disappearance. They learned that he had been struggling with drugs and money and had failed to show up for work the previous day. With this new information, investigators decided to comb through the car wash security footage once more, hoping to catch a glimpse of Joseph's brown Lincoln Town car, which had been out of commission due to transmission issues. The pale yellow Buick station wagon was the only lead detectives had in Carlie's abduction case. It had pulled into the car wash parking lot just 3 minutes before the young girl disappeared. It was unclear whether the abductor had spotted Carlie as he drove by, or if he had followed her to the car wash after seeing her leave her friend's house. What was certain was that he had likely planned the abduction for some time, waiting for the perfect opportunity to present itself. And unfortunately for Carlie, it did. The surveillance footage provided little information about the driver or the license plate, but the police had a suspect in mind, Joseph Smith. The officers went to his residence, a room he was renting from friends after being kicked out of the home he was sharing with his wife and 3 daughters. But when they knocked on the door, no one answered, despite seeing Joseph smoking a cigarette outside. The authorities were on high alert as they spoke to Joseph's neighbors, who revealed they'd seen him chatting with a mysterious woman outside, a woman they thought could be his sister. The neighbors were certain Joseph was still inside his residence and he hadn't left. Joseph's sister arrived at the property and, after a brief conversation with the police, went inside to find her elusive brother. Finally, Joseph emerged from the house, bleary-eyed and disoriented, claiming he hadn't heard the detectives' knocks because he'd been sleeping. The investigators questioned Joseph about his whereabouts during Carlie's disappearance. He told them he was watching the Super Bowl at home with his friends, who could back up his story. However, when the detectives showed Joseph an image from the surveillance video, he admitted the man looked like him but denied being anywhere near the car wash that day. Joseph was then asked to roll up his sleeves, revealing tattoos on his forearms that matched those of the man in the video. The detectives also spotted minor cuts and scrapes on his hands. To add to the mounting suspicion, Joseph confessed to using Jeffrey and Naomi's yellow station wagon on the day Carlie went missing. Yet he insisted he only drove the car to a nearby marina to gaze at the water before returning home. The police thought they had their prime suspect in custody until Naomi confirmed his alibi, leaving them to question everything. However, things took a sharp turn when Joseph's probation officers conducted a search of his car and found drugs, leading to his arrest for violating probation. Later, Joseph's friend Jeffrey revealed disturbing information, claiming that Naomi had mixed up the dates and Joseph returned the next day after borrowing their station wagon. Even more alarming, Jeffrey had reset the odometer before Joseph's departure, but upon his return, the car had been driven over 300 miles, with the backseat down and the interior in disarray. When asked about Joseph's attire, Jeffrey remembered a mechanic's uniform. The police began to wonder, what was Joseph up to during those missing hours? Jeffrey and Naomi allowed authorities to search their home, but they didn't find anything that could lead them to the missing girl. However, the discovery of drugs in Joseph's car and his subsequent arrest did nothing to ease the suspicions surrounding him. Joseph's mother showed up at his workplace and confronted his colleagues, demanding to know why they had called the police on her son. But her words left investigators wondering if even she had doubts about Joseph's innocence. Despite her anger, the coworkers sensed that she too suspected her son was the man in the CCTV footage. Her statement, "If Joe did this, I will get the truth out of him," revealed that she hadn't dismissed the possibility of his guilt. A mother who was convinced of her child's innocence would have been more assertive, stating plainly, he didn't do it. As they continued their search for Carlie in the nearby woods, the question remained, would they find her, and would Joseph finally be implicated in her disappearance? The authorities reached out to the forensics team at the City of Sarasota sanitation site, asking them to secure the transfer building for a meticulous search of the trash the following day. However, they had no idea that the search would become unnecessary soon. While Joseph was locked up, an old friend of his showed up at the police station and asked to speak with the investigators. The friend revealed that Joseph had talked about his disturbing urge to harm women on multiple occasions, and that the man in the CCTV footage strongly resembled him. Following this revelation, the detectives transported Joseph from the prison to the police headquarters for an intense interrogation. The police said they needed to know what happened to Carlie. Joseph said he was advised to talk to a lawyer, and the interview was over. However, just because he didn't talk to the police doesn't mean he didn't talk at all. Joseph had called his brother John while in jail and confessed. 5 days after Carlie disappeared, John contacted authorities and directed them to a wooded area behind a church, just a few miles from her home. He claimed that Joseph had confessed to abducting and brutally assaulting the young girl, but alleged that he didn't remember much of the incident due to drug use. It's possible that Joseph was attempting to set up a defense for diminished capacity, but the specific facts of the case will determine its viability. Meanwhile, as John spoke with investigators, Joseph repeatedly called him and became increasingly agitated by what he was saying. The disturbing details of the case were beginning to unravel, and the truth was more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. John's voice quivered as he held the phone to his ear. "Did you just choke her too hard?" he asked, his heart pounding in his chest. Joseph's response was a chilling yes, but the horror didn't end there. Joseph went on to admit to violently assaulting Carlie, leaving his DNA behind as evidence of his heinous crime. The shock of it all was too much for Joseph's mother, who arrived at John's house with her own confession. Joseph had called her from jail earlier that day, admitting to the murder. As police raced to the scene, they discovered Carlie's body partially hidden in the woods, with marks on her wrists indicating she had been bound. An autopsy revealed she had been strangled with a ligature and brutally assaulted. Forensic evidence, including Joseph's DNA and hair fibers found on Carlie's body, left no doubt as to who was responsible. Joseph was charged with murder and justice would finally be served. As the evidence against him continued to mount, the search of the yellow station wagon yielded a damning discovery: 2 hairs that were a perfect match for Carlie's, and several fibers that matched the shirt she was last seen wearing. The investigation led authorities to believe that Joseph, under the influence of drugs, happened upon Carlie as she walked alone, leading to a fateful encounter that would ultimately result in her tragic abduction, assault, and murder. Shockingly, despite a string of 13 convictions for various crimes over the past decade, Joseph had somehow managed to evade justice until now, prompting a fierce outcry from the community. Even more disturbingly, it was later revealed that local authorities had requested an arrest warrant for Joseph a month prior to Carlie's abduction, but a Florida judge had failed to act due to an alleged paperwork oversight. A harrowing chapter in the story of Joseph Smith came to a close on October 24, 2005, when he was found guilty of first-degree murder, as well as the heinous crimes of kidnapping and battery on a child under 12. The sentence was fittingly severe, with death by lethal injection for Carlie's murder and life without parole for the other charges. However, in a shocking turn of events, Joseph was granted a new sentencing hearing in 2017 after a judge vacated his death sentence due to a new bill requiring a unanimous vote by the jury. Despite having initially received 10 out of 12 votes in favor of the death penalty, Joseph would never face the ultimate punishment for his unspeakable crimes. He ultimately met his fate in prison, passing away while awaiting the new sentencing hearing that was scheduled for 2021. Please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more shocking cases like this.